Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back on this special edition of Illinois Rising. Joining me is House Speaker Mike Madigan's longtime press spokesman, Steve Brown. So, Steve, a question. Let's have a little bit of a conversation about electoral politics. Why won't Mike Madigan let Lisa run for governor?
It's her decision completely.
Uh-huh.
And I, for one, thought it would be an interesting challenge at some point to have her run for governor and the speaker stay in office and see how that debate goes. She made a decision. She didn't think that would work, and here we are.
And do you think that there's any inkling that she may change her decision, or that House Speaker Mike Madigan may be willing to defer to his daughter and step aside so that she feels comfortable running?
Yeah, I've seen some reporting. I think it happened while we were in Philadelphia at the convention, where she was saying things about running for governor that suggested she might change her view. But I don't know that. I don't speak for her. I don't think the speaker has any near-term plans to retire.
Yeah, it seems pretty clear that he doesn't want to retire.
Right.
Yeah. And just generally speaking about the 28 governor's race, and we'll kind of work our way back to 2016 in the legislative races. But
it's amazing the way people just, in Illinois, we skip past whatever's right in front of it.
Well,
and
no.
it happens all the time.
Well,
And I think it's pretty unique to Illinois in terms of the volume and I mean, because you hear that discussion, you hear about 18, and you hear about the next mayoral election.
Yeah, sure. Well,
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, one side or the other has a vested interest in changing the balance. So, of course, you're going to have people talking about it. And then when you have people openly speculating about it and a poll being done to say who would be the best Democrat to go up against Bruce Rauner, for example, that feeds the conversation. Sure. And so who would be the best Democrat to go up against Bruce Rauner? And is Dick Durbin a serious possibility?
Well, Dick Durbin continues to talk about it. You would think that with his career in Washington, that would be a pretty big change, going from the legislative branch in the U.S. Senate to the executive branch of the state. I think he certainly knows what to do. I think he's an experienced campaigner. And I would be surprised if he made that change. I think he'd be a terrific candidate.
What about Pat Quinn? He's making noise again. He's, passing petitions in Chicago for this and that.
And I'm not sure that Pat has the appeal to be successful. He angered a lot of people with some of the things he did while he was in office, to the point that they turned and voted for Governor Rauner. I think the governor mistakenly thought those were votes for him more than being votes against Governor Quinn.
Yeah, repudiation of Quinn.
Yeah. And so that's where I think Rauner's found himself in some problems, because he's gone into areas which he carried, thinking I can push my ideas, and they haven't been, universally beloved. So what Quinn decides to do, I'm not certain. I'm not really a close confidant of him. So I just don't think he would have a broad appeal as he once did.
Well, speaking of Governor Rauner and Mike Madigan, was the governor wrong to think that he was going to be able to sit down and hammer out some kind of budget deal with Mike Madigan that included at least some of what he had outlined as his policy agenda?
Well, I don't think that he was wrong. I'm just never sure what he's actually trying to attempt to accomplish at any particular time.
Well, so
I think there have been efforts to deal with the state finances, as the speaker points out. There have been 6 or 7 or 8, I lost count right off the top of my head, Dan, of appropriation bills that have been passed for various full budget, partial budget, clean up the mess from the fiscal year before Rauner came in. And we've been able to do that and pass bills and do it in a pretty bipartisan fashion. It's just when they get all tangled up with the other things he wants to do, that's what becomes harder. And then in my honest opinion, if the guy had learned how to take a victory lap on some things, we'd be much further down the road.
For example?
Work comp. House passed a bill, Senate passed a bill, could have reconciled it. Wasn't good enough for him because I think he's got advisors who say, oh, no, you got to get 100%. You got to get 100% of what you want on a particular topic before you can really be satisfied.
I'm not sure that's the case.
Well, I think that's what I've seen play out.
Okay. Well, I mean,
Okay?
I know to kind of his inner circle of advisors, many of whom previously worked for Mark Kirk, and I think they, generally speaking, and as does Governor Ronner, he wouldn't have made all the money he made if he didn't know when to declare victory, and frankly, recognize that sometimes you need to take half a loaf rather than if you can't get the full loaf. And I think that's a philosophy. It seems to me, just going back to those collective bargaining agreements, that he's been willing to negotiate with people that come to the table, and successfully as well, that come to the table in good faith.
Well, all I see is where we've tried to do some of the things he's wanted to do, maybe not 100% his way, and he's resisted.
Is it more because he has seemingly been negotiating against himself? I mean, he lays out a turnaround agenda, then he's willing to walk it back in, all the while saying, I'm open to revenue if we talk about at least some of what I'm talking about here and what I want here in these structural reforms. But then he negotiates against himself, so you're just letting your political opponent negotiate against himself rather than having to compromise to move the flag on, for example, passing the first truly balanced state budget in, say, 15 years.
Yeah, I don't know that he's really negotiating against himself. I think he's realizing that he's not been persuasive on some of these things. I mean, he talks about, he uses the term local control as if it was really going to be applied, but he's going to tell local governments what they could control and how they could control it. So that's not really local control. Many of them, several hundred, have said no thanks. And so then he walks back from different things, So I just think he could have had some near-term accomplishments that were on that list in the first session of the General Assembly. He missed an opportunity. And then all the things that have gone on since then, all the advertising and the candidates and all that stuff has just kind of made things a little bit harder. Not impossible, but harder.
So, speaking of advertising, there seems to be some confusion. So in advance of the state legislative races, because these are really important legislative races, to see if Democrats can maintain their supermajorities in both chambers or not. Do you, and does Mike Madigan, because I know he's a smart guy and he reads and so, you know that state government has nothing to do with Social Security and Medicare, right?
Pretty much, right?
Yeah. Okay, because sometimes it's confusing because House Democrats and Democrat state parties send out mailers saying Republicans are going to cut your Social Security or your Medicare, and there's no state legislative Republican or any state legislator that could do that even if they wanted to because they're federal programs. And so I just wonder if that's something where you're just not familiar with how the federal government works versus state government, or you're being disingenuous.
Yeah, I know how the federal government works. I'm not familiar with those mailers. I've heard them mentioned from time to time, but I'm not familiar with them.
Well, if I give you copies, could we get a response in terms of whether or not those will cease so that we all understand what we're talking about and we're not talking about issues over which state government has no control?
Well, it's hard to talk about ceasing something that I don't know that we had any involvement with to begin with. Well, but if you've got copies, send them along.
He's the chairman of the state Democrat Party, right?
Send it along, Dave.
Is it paid for, on those things? And
send them along.
Okay. All right. Very good. So on state legislative races, how important is the supermajority to Mike Madigan, or is it something where he'd rather have a workable majority and fewer mouths to feed?
Well, I think the use of that term, which is one I don't use, is not realistic because it's not a working 3/5. Okay, not all Democrats walk down the same side of the street every day. Some issues they do, many they don't. You'll have people who are for things, people who are never going to vote for any kind of tax hike. So you don't really have that 3/5 that people like to talk about. Smaller group is easier to work with, but the more the merrier. And it looks like there's some popular people around the state.
Do you think, does the speaker think, I should say, you guys, I need to be so generic about it, but does the speaker think that regardless of what happens at the presidential level or even statewide level with Kirk versus Duckworth or Munger versus Mendoza that you're well positioned to maintain that supermajority, maybe even pick up seats by running against Governor Rauner?
I think it's going to be a hard-fought campaign season. It's going to be very expensive. I think we'll see spending as we've never seen before in Illinois. In some of these legislative races, you're liable to see spending that'll look like what we used to spend for the governor's race a few years ago.
Truly.
And I don't do predictions, is my final cop-out on that for you, in terms of what we might get. There are some candidates working hard in districts held by Republicans, though.
After 30 years, just kind of a closing thought on this, insight from you. After 30 years at the helm, do you think Mike Madigan has any regrets about political or policy choices, given where Illinois finds itself?
I'm sure he probably does. I don't think I've ever had that conversation with him, so I wouldn't be able to enumerate. But I can't imagine that he stands there today and thinks everything was terrific all along, given some of the things that have gone on.
Does he care about policy, or is it just about power politics and maintaining his role as Speaker?
Well, I think you have to care about the policy because that's what makes the politics work. If you have good policies in place, if you're responsive to people with what they need to do in their districts, that's how you win their political support, in my opinion.
Well, but Illinois seems to be an outlier in that, though, too. You've had terrible policy and still political support.
That's why I think that the policy, the situation in Illinois, not as bad as some would like to portray.
All right, Steve Brown, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah.